So Jimmy Dore has been advocating for the idea of the left withholding their vote from Pelosi for Speaker unless she commits to a floor vote on Medicare for All. This is something he's been advocating for a while now. And he's been aggressive. In fact, he's doing, he's done interviews, like he went on Rising with Crystal and Sagar to talk about this. He's trying to spread the message as far and wide as he can because he really believes in it. And he thinks that, we should demand something for our votes. Because, and this happened last time too, we were told that, hey, the furthest left option to be leader of the Democrats is Nancy Pelosi. So it's either Nancy Pelosi or somebody way to her right. So in that situation, who are you going to pick to be leader of the Democrats? And it really is the oldest establishment trick in the book. You give somebody all terrible options, and then you pick the best among the terrible options, and you pretend like it's some sort of victory for the left. And again, it's a trick. It's a trick. And, I fell for it just like everybody else. I mean, I was thinking, well, if those are the only options and she's the furthest left option, I guess, right? But no, see, now you've had more time to organize since the last time they tried this trick on us. And you didn't organize to come up with a better option? Honestly, that's a giant failure of the left. You have to organize. We can't just always accept a terrible option among all bad options and then pretend like it's some sort of victory. Now, what happened last time is the more conservative Democrats played hardball with Pelosi, and she conceded to them because they played hardball with her. So what Jimmy's doing is he's advocating that the Justice Democrats and really the Congressional Progressive Caucus, or a large chunk of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, withhold your votes. I think all you need is anywhere from 8 to 15 votes of the leftist Congress people. If they withhold their votes and they say, listen, we'll vote for you, but you have to have Medicare for All for a floor vote. If they do that, then we'll get a floor vote on Medicare for All. That's what'll happen. You could try to pass the buck and say, oh, well, then she won't do that, and then somebody to her right will be elected. Well, what does it matter if somebody to her right is elected if she's not going to allow the floor vote on Medicare for All, and the person to her right isn't going to allow the floor vote on Medicare for All? Then, it's the same thing either way. So who cares if it's Pelosi or not in that situation? And you don't have to pass the buck. The onus is on her. So in other words, yeah, she can be speaker, but, you're just going to have to allow a floor vote on Medicare for All. This is how you play politics. You organize, you strategize. This is what you do. So Jimmy's been pushing this idea. And listen, this wasn't even really a controversial idea, so much so that Sam Seder, who despises Jimmy Dore, even Sam Seder did a segment a week or so ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, and he was like, I think Jimmy got this one right. I think that this is what the leftist Congress people should do. Yeah, demand something for your vote. Duh. Like, this is politics. This is politics 101. So Jimmy's been making these criticisms. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has not responded to Jimmy, but what happened was Justin Jackson, running back for the LA Chargers, and actually, he's a friend of mine. I really like him. We talk every now and then. So I know that was just a humble brag right there. That was a little bit insufferable, I agree, but I just wanted to tell you I like Justin. He's a friend of mine, and he understands this stuff inside and out as well as anybody. So, Justin Jackson's been seeing this campaign that Jimmy Dore's been doing, and he's like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. Let's do this. So Justin Jackson tweets at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I won't show him to you, but I'll just read him for you. He said the following: if AOC and the squad don't do what Jimmy Dore has suggested and withhold their vote for Pelosi for speakership unless Medicare for All gets brought to the floor for a vote, they will be revealing themselves. Power concedes nothing without a demand. So AOC didn't respond to Jimmy with Jimmy's campaign, but she saw this tweet from Justin Jackson. According to Justin, she's responded to him previously. So she responded to him, and she said, the problem with this idea is that there isn't enough thought given to step 2. The Dem voters aren't there yet, and with a razor-thin margin, the Dem no's are greater. So you issue threats, withhold your vote, and lose. Then what? If you want to know who's opposed, look at the co-sponsor list. Now, before I continue, let me just say the co-sponsor list is bullshit. There's 118 that on paper support Medicare for all, but if you demand a vote, you will find out who really supports Medicare for all. Because I'm sure you guys remember, Kamala was one of the first in the Senate to sign on to Bernie's Medicare for all bill. And then under the slightest bit of scrutiny and pressure from the media, she immediately abandoned it. So just because somebody says, oh yeah, I'm for this in theory, if you actually have to vote on it, that's when you find out who's really for it and not for it. So that's not a good point. Oh, just look at the co-sponsor list. No, you need to actually force them to vote on it, and then we find out who's really for it and who's not for it. And there will be plenty who jump ship. And by the way, there might even be plenty who nominally are not for it now, who then vote for it if we apply the proper amount of pressure, which is, again, a point that I'll get back to. So she's saying, oh, this isn't strategic enough is basically her argument. She continues, in contrast, you can leverage to push for things that can happen and change lives, i.e. a $15 minimum wage vote in the first 100 days. She says doable. Elevating longtime progressive champions to important positions of leadership, also doable. That's the opportunity cost to weigh. So there's a few things to say in response to that. First of all, the House already passed a $15 minimum wage bill. You already passed it. And Mitch McConnell's blocking it. Would I love to see a public pressure campaign around the $15 minimum wage where all the Democrats go out there and hit the media and blame Mitch McConnell? Of course I would. But we already passed $15 minimum wage through the House. So to say, no, let's not do that. Let's try to get a $15 minimum wage. Okay, mission accomplished. You already achieved that. So that's not a response. And you say, oh, let's elevate, let's get progressives more committee assignments because then we can impact policy more is the point she's making. Totally agree. Condition that as well. Like, this is what you do. Yes, you condition that. But why are you setting it up as an either or? Like, either we do Medicare for all, or we can do these things that are more doable. Or you can demand both committee assignments that we get more progressive legislation, and you can demand a vote on Medicare for all. $50 minimum wage, again, it already passed. So that's on the Senate now. You want to continue a public pressure campaign? Totally agree with you. But don't act like, oh, that's doable, and Medicare for all isn't, so let's focus on that. No, you already passed a $50 minimum wage. You already did that. And I don't really care. Again, we'll come back to this idea of doable or not doable in a second, okay? So Justin saw what she said, and listen, like I said, he knows this stuff inside and out. He knows it just as well as I do and just as well as most of you do. So he said, why aren't they there? Talking about, the politicians and whether or not they're for or against Medicare for all. He's saying, why aren't they there? The people of the party are there. So the voters are there. Over 85% of Democrats are for Medicare for all. It's not acceptable that leadership isn't there. If they have no threat of not staying in leadership, what's the point? Pelosi was speaker for 2 years with no Medicare for all vote. What is your plan to force her to get a vote? So in other words, he's saying, listen, okay, you're telling me that now's not the right time. You're telling me, wait for a more convenient season. Where have I heard that before? That's right, Martin Luther King, when he was talking about the white moderate and the problem with the white moderate. So she's saying this isn't strategic. You got to wait for a more convenient season. And he's like, okay, so what's your plan? You're telling me to wait, so give me your plan. Are we going to vote on it a year from now? 2 years from now? What are the steps that how are you getting the ball rolling to get to this end goal? And see, that's one of the things where people are really showing their hand when discussing this issue, is that they'll reject Jimmy's plan and then they just won't give their own plan, which means really you're saying, let's not have a vote on Medicare for all and let's leave it at that for now. So in other words, that's a defense of the status quo. That's exactly what that is. That's not up in the air. That's not a question. That's the definition of a defense of the status quo. I reject your plan, and I'm not even going to give you my own plan and tell you when we can eventually vote on it and the steps that we need to do in order to get there. So Justin Jackson sniffs that out and is like, okay, what's your plan? AOC responds, why aren't they there is the real question. We watched the presidential debates and saw how many fiercely defend our for-profit insurance system, but know that the movement pressure, positive support, primaries, popularity, organizing, etc. is working. More co-sponsors now than ever. Okay, so, but see, now that's weird because she's advocating for the exact same thing Justin Jackson is advocating for and Jimmy Dore is advocating for, but they're actually like, now's the time, pedal to the metal. We're going to do all that right now as we force the vote on Medicare for all. And her response is basically, no, like, all those things are good, but let's do all the organizing, let's do all the grassroots pressure, and not have the vote now. I mean, that's like, honestly, I just find that idea so incredibly silly. Like, what are you going to do? Let's organize a big strike with the demand of not having a floor vote on Medicare for all. Like, what are you talking about? So in theory, do all the work to get us there, but don't vote on it now. And I won't tell you when in the future we could vote on it, but just do the work, and then I guess we'll circle back to it. And again, she says more co-sponsors now than ever. That's not the real test. The real test is when it's up for a vote. Because a lot of those people are going to abandon ship because they're just doing it for virtue signaling and for messaging, and you're letting them get away with it. You got to hold their feet to the fire. So Justin responds, I would love for Democrats to be on the record denying their constituents health care during a pandemic. Sounds like good politics for the progressive movement and our goals. So do you understand what he's saying there? He's saying, okay, let's see everybody's true colors. And if a Democrat votes against universal health care during a pandemic, they just help the left massively, because now you know who your enemies are, who your targets are, who you organize against, and if the left knew how to message and strategize and organize, you can win campaigns on that issue alone. You can win more seats on this issue alone. My opponent voted against universal health care in the middle of a pandemic where 300,000 Americans died and where tens of millions of Americans are hemorrhaging their health insurance. So this is Justin Jackson teaching a politician, hey, here's why the politics of this are intelligent. So it's not just the correct thing in principle, which it is, it's also the correct thing in terms of strategy. Go ahead, vote against Medicare for all in a pandemic. I want to see it. I want to see it. That'll be one of those things where it'll go down in the history books as shameful. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, people look back and say, holy shit, the party that was supposed to be the left party, half of them voted against universal health care in a pandemic? Justin Jackson is saying force their hand and then we win either way. Because if we win the vote, okay, Medicare for all gets through the House. If we lose, okay, we lost, but you win by losing because then you expose who the charlatans and the con men and the frauds are, and you use that against them and you get more left victories as a result of that. This isn't rocket science. Okay. Then AOC responds and says, I respect that. And in an important way, they are on the record. There are 118 House Dems who have publicly signed on to guaranteed health care during this term. They are listed here. Again, the co-sponsor list can be used for toilet paper because that's not how the actual votes will break down. And if you think that is how it will break down, you're just naive because we saw exactly what happened with Kamala Harris. And we know how these politicians are giant virtue signalers. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book that you sign on to these great pieces of legislation when you know it's going to be blocked either by a Republican president or a Republican Senate. But when you actually get power, what you do shows your true agenda. And so what happened? There was all this talk about Medicare for all, Medicare for all, Medicare for all. Then the Democrats took the House, and we didn't even get a vote on the House on Medicare for all. So, like, that's the real test. I don't know how many times I could say it. And everybody knows deep down that's the real test. And you know what? By the way, you don't have to tell me this because I was part of the giant campaign to try to get more co-sponsors for Medicare for all. I was part of that campaign. I did it. Cenk Uygur did it. Jimmy Dore did it. Don't you guys remember? I came out here and did segments and said, call your Congress people. Because there was a time when it was only like 10 or something Congress people who were for Medicare for all on paper. And so we did a giant campaign and we got it all the way up to 118. We're one of the reasons why that happened because we wanted to apply public pressure. So I was one of the people who pushed for that. But I'm telling you, and I knew back then and I know it now, that's step one. Step two is now let's see you actually vote for it when it comes time for a vote. So let's have a vote. So now that was the end of their back and forth. Now let's talk about the strategy angle of it and the principle angle of it. So one of the reasons why, yes, you should withhold your vote for Pelosi unless she agrees to a Medicare for all vote is because you need to get people on the record so we know who to primary. Like I said, that list of 118 co-sponsors, it's useless. We'll know when they actually vote on it who did the right thing when push came to shove and who didn't. And I suspect you'll have some that'll abandon ship. I also suspect you'll be able to knock off some and get them to vote for it who currently are not for it, because we are going to do a public pressure campaign like nobody has ever seen before. So that's the first thing. You get them on the record. We know who our enemies are, and you message on this nonstop. And then the second thing is you shift the Overton window in your favor. And this is copying the Tea Party. Guys, what the Tea Party did worked. The Tea Party was such a pain in the ass for Republican leadership that 2 Republican leaders stepped down because they couldn't handle the disagreement they were getting from their right. So the Tea Party hated Republican leadership as much as they hated Democratic leadership. And to the point where the Republican leadership was like, I'm out. I can't deal with these people. So they were at odds all the time. They were fighting all the time. Now compare that to the Justice Democrats, and I love them. I helped a lot of them get elected, but they're calling Nancy Pelosi Mama Bear. And they think that, it's not nefarious. They think that, oh, if I go along to get along more, then we'll get more progressive victories because you want to be on their good side, because if you're on their good side, then they'll do more for you. That's the thought process. But again, that thought process just happens to be dead wrong. So what you do is you pick a fight. It's a shot across the bow. No. We're not going to take this laying down anymore. We're going to fight back. We're going to organize. We're going to strategize. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to shift the Overton window. That's what we're going to do. So again, you have the vote. If you win, you win. And the public pressure campaign would be instrumental in making that happen. But if you lose, you still win. Because then you know who your enemies are, and you have a talking point for the rest of your life. I fought to get universal health care during a pandemic, and these cretins didn't because they're corrupt corporatists who are doing the bidding of the for-profit health insurance companies and big pharma. And then the other thing is, you brag about your morality. You see, this is the thing that the left doesn't understand, is that they always are responding to the terms of the debate and the discussion laid down by the center or the right. They're never changing the debate landscape, where it's like, no, you're going to have to answer to me. You're going to have to go and explain to people why 300,000 Americans can die. You look at that crisis and you still don't say, okay, now's the time that we really got to take this next step and do a universal healthcare system. It took World War II for a lot of the European countries to do universal national healthcare systems. And the idea is, hey, we're in a crisis. Everything is terrible. We need to rebuild from scratch, so why not do this because it makes sense? And now we have a pandemic with 300,000 Americans dead, tens of millions losing their health insurance, and you have people on the left saying, no, now's not the time to push for Medicare for all. Then when is the time? When is the time? Here's another quote from Martin Luther King for you. The time is always right to do what is right. Now, it's going to be tough. Like, that's the thing. People act like we don't know that. Like, of course we know that. Duh. It's the most obvious thing in the world. Of course it's going to be tough. But if you have 500,000 Americans angrily calling Congress, filling up their voicemails, if you have an ocean of protesters descend on D.C. on this specific issue, you can scare the pants off of them. You can scare them into submission. It's a situation where 70% of the country already agrees this is the right thing to do. You know what else was difficult? If you're in 1959 in Mississippi and you're fighting for desegregation, that's difficult. People are going to laugh you out of the state. That's what would happen. They'd be like, look at this pie in the sky idealist. Don't be ridiculous. But now you look back and you're like, oh, that was sort of a no-brainer. And the moral stand was necessary. Which gets to the final point on this, which is, I think there are clear strategic reasons to force the vote on Medicare for all, and how it could work for the left even if the left loses. But let's put that aside for a second. The principle is what matters oftentimes, where even if the strategy wasn't there, on principle alone, there are certain things you should do. Because if you're in politics for the right reasons, This is how you derive your meaning and your purpose. So the whole point of being there is the process of fighting to get these things that are morally correct and ethically correct implemented. If you're not there for that reason, then why are you there? Careerism? Self-aggrandizement? Playing the game? Tribalism? Like, what's the reason? What's the point? If you're not going to dot every I, cross every T, do everything imaginable in order to bring this about. And this is my difference with a lot of people who are the elected Justice Democrats, is that I was clear from the beginning. I always wanted a hostile takeover. Hostile takeover. You're not going to win by doing the same old, which is kowtowing and bending to the system to accommodate it and doing tit for tat with the leadership and trying to get favors. Leftists have been trying that forever, and it never worked. The only power you have as a leftist congressperson is people power, is the bully pulpit. Use it. Use it. Tell people we're going to protest for Medicare for all. We're going to do it in Washington, D.C. I want to see 1 million people in the streets. I want 500,000 phone calls to Congress. I want you to scare them into doing the right thing. I don't care if, as long as they vote the right way, I don't care how they got there. So make them get there. You got to, by any means necessary that are nonviolent and moral and ethical. That's what we're going to do. And that's why I say you need a hostile takeover. I get shit from people to my left because I'm a deep believer in reform over revolution. I think there's no chance in hell to win a revolution. So what you need to do is use the institutions and use the available path to your advantage any way you can. And the only way that would work is a hostile takeover. You need to be comfortable with having Democratic leadership be your enemy. You need to be comfortable with having the media be your enemy. You need to lean into those fights. And in the process of leaning into those fights, you get more and more and more popular. These institutions and these leaders, they're paper tigers. Nobody likes them. Nancy Pelosi has an approval rating around 20%. And people are scared to take her on? Are you kidding me? You should say, yummy in my tummy. This is the first thing I want to do is take her on. So I get it, though. It's tough for them because they feel like no matter how much they say they believe in democracy, it's overwhelming. It's scary. It gives you anxiety when you're part of these institutions. You're in these institutions. And you look around and you think, well, there's got to be some reason for like the meritocracy of this and the hierarchy of this. You start to believe that people earned their positions. Like, yeah, Nancy Pelosi's been here for so long, and so she worked her way up. So who am I? If I'm just I've only been here for a few years and I'm a congressperson, who the hell am I to stand up to this behemoth who's earned her place and worked her way up the ladder? And really, you just have to break that mindset because that mindset is not true. There is no meritocracy. There is no legitimate hierarchy in Washington, D.C. Usually the people who rise to the top are the most corrupt. It's the swamp. That is true. It's the swamp. So if you're the biggest corporatist and you're the biggest sellout, that's how you get far. So you need to take these people on and call out the absurdity of it all. Call out the absurdity of not even voting on Medicare for all during a pandemic. So anyway, listen, Jimmy Dore's right. Jimmy Dore's right. Justin Jackson is right. Of course you force this vote. And if you win, you win. If you lose, you still win because you just got everybody on record. We know who our enemies are. We know who we're going to primary. We know how to mobilize and how to organize. Like, people don't understand how big of an incentive it is when you have hundreds of thousands of people in the street telling politicians they have to do something. People don't understand how big of an incentive it is when a congressperson's voicemail fills up in an hour and a half because there's so many angry calls saying, you're doing this. How could you not do this? You never know what we can achieve until we try. But like I said, even if we lose, we still win because then you have a strategy in place to use this for our advantage. Use it for our advantage when it comes to messaging. When it comes to the races in 2022. We're the people who fought for you to get healthcare in a pandemic. These other people didn't do that. But even if you want to put all that aside, what I just said, remember this point. you can't say, oh, I agree with your goal, but not your methods. If, number one, you say, let's not vote on the thing that we both agree is good. And number two, you don't have your own plan that gives us a timeline of when we could get this implemented. Because at that point, whether or not you realize it, you are just gaslighting to protect the status quo. That's what that is. It's a defense of the status quo. I mean, in her original ad, she said very clearly, no, we could do this now. We could do this now. Green New Deal, Medicare for all, now. Now we're hearing a different argument. She's wrong. Jimmy Dore's right. Justin Jackson is right. Let's lean into this fight, man. What are we waiting for? There's never going to be a better time than during a pandemic. I get it. You don't have the numbers. So get to work on that. People use that argument to rationalize not doing anything, taking their ball and going home. No, if you say we don't have the numbers, well, then I guess you better get to work on that. Oh my God, it's really hard. Oh my God, how are we going to do it? Oh my God. This is what I've been trying to tell you guys. I've been saying it for years now. You know, you coalition build where you can coalition build. And when you can't coalition build and somebody makes clear that they're your enemy politically, okay, now the fight is on. Now we're going to have public, pressure campaigns against you. And I'll use any argument that's going to work, any argument that's going to destroy you. I'll quote the exact amount of money that you've taken from for-profit health insurance companies. How you like them apples? I'll run ads on it. I will do anything I can to get this implemented. There's always an excuse. There's always a reason. The Tea Party never made excuses. They just did it. They just acted. And even when they lost, they won because they shifted that Overton window. So it's time to actually use their tactics. Actually use their tactics. Make leadership hate you. Make the media hate you. Lean into this fight. This is ridiculous. 300,000 Americans dead, and we can't even get the left to say, let's have a vote on universal health care. It's a sick joke, and everybody sees through it.